Well, I'm back over here with a cultivator, a power harrow, but it cultivates because I don't want to add plowed to it because then I have to, do a corn harvest or whatnot to get rid of the plowed state. So allow create fields. Even if I did just want to do the corn, I would have grabbed a subsoiler. So I still would have needed the cultivator makes fields mod, and that's just because it'll be easier to make sure I'm on the line. I'm a little to the left here because I want to make sure you can always recorrect to the right later, but you won't be able to, well, you would have to exit the game and do it again if it extends a little bit. Yep, let's turn it on. That's actually perfect, except I'm not on 180 degrees. There we go. And I'm at 684, so I'll know to come back the other way. Okay, I believe this was 684, I said. There we go. The hard part is done. Now all I have to do is make sure I lift it and get the rest of this field turned into a field. As you can see, it now shows it's a field that needs plowing and lime. But it does have a layer of fertilizer because I'm plowing meadow grass in. And it is. I now have an actual field. It has one level of fertilizer. So I am going to grab the seeder and put some wheat down, I guess, because that's what the seeder will be on anyway. So I can do a wheat harvest and get rid of that. Which means, well, it's still going to show the needs rolling because it's still showing that it is wheat, but it is no longer saying that it is fertilized. So let me return this and that. And then get to October and save the game so that it's in the same state it was for the other tests. So I'm in October. And I'm going to use this Caro so that I can seed it. Correct. This will be a lot easier because I don't need to create fields. It's already a field. Well, it's now sown with grass, so I can get to April and get a first cut and see what the baseline is on seeded grass on this field. But it's now April, so I can get this baseline test done. You can see I have 28,511 liters of grass. Which is a 1.8% less than the baseline cut of meadow. There we go. We have 33,265, which is a 16.67% increase over the first cut. So it is March. It is ready to harvest, but it's first stage ready to harvest. So 19,005 liters, which is a 33.34% loss. Well, I'm going to mulch this wheat stubble in and then get it seeded and see how that goes. There we go. We have 29,037 liters of grass, which is a 1.84% increase over the baseline. So I'm going to use the roller and then harvest it in July. Okay, I got 33,262, which is very close to what I got for the second cut. That's a 16.66% increase over the baseline. I'm back in April again, this time with the weeder, which should work exactly like the roller because it works exactly like the roller. There we go. 33,262, which is exactly the same amount it got with the roller, and a 16.66% increase over the baseline, as expected. So now I'm back in October, after I've just planted the grass, and I'm going to put a layer of fertilizer down, which will be another boring test because, well, it should be the same as a weeder, a roller, or the second cut, but I will do it again in April and then do a cut in July with the full bonus. $33,262. So let me empty that. It over here. And then I can get the fertilizer spreader and fertilize the field again. There we go, 38,016. Which is a 33.34% increase over the baseline. We're back to a just seeded field, and I have the seed roller. So 29,037 liters of grass from using the seed roller, which is a 1.84% increase over the baseline. I'm now going to empty that and get to July. And there is 33,794. Which is a 1.59% increase over the second cut baseline. So we're back in October, but it's before I seeded now. So I am going to put some lime down, and then seed it, and then get to April again. So there was 28,511 liters, which is a 0% change from baseline. So back in October, before planting, and I have a subsoiler, so I can get the needs plowing filter removed. $28,508, which is a 0.01% negative change from the baseline, so no change. So I'm back here in October before planting so that I can do the last real test, which is to do everything. Now, if all the other tests are accurate, I am expecting about 39,000 to be the yield in April. There was wheat on this field, so I can mulch that in and then get to all the other things that need to be done to the field. and see how much everything increases it. So 39,069, which is pretty much exactly what I was expecting. The increase from mulching, seed roller, and fertilization times two, with 10,557, which should have left everything at 39,068. So 1 liter difference is definitely within margin of error for a 37.03% increase over the baseline first cut. So I've seen it said quite a lot actually that if you use the weeder or roller right after harvest, the grass will be ready quicker. You can see I have a just harvested field and I am in April. So I'm going to grab the weeder. I'm going to do one line of the weeder on this side of the field. Now, the only major difference between a weeder and a roller, besides the fact the weeder it's a lot wider, is the weeder will get rid of anything left on the ground. So if you have some grass left on the ground, that will get rid of it. You don't want to do it before you pick up the grass, but it is nice if you don't like seeing the little bits you didn't feel like going back for. The roller will not do that. It will get rid of tire tracks though. So the other side of the field, I'll probably do 3 lines of the roller. So there we go. I have a weeded section, a just harvested section, and a rolled section. And you can see that the part I did with the weeder and the part I did with the roller is progressed to growing instead of harvested. But this is not a growing stage color of growing that grass usually gets. So if I go to May, you can see the whole field is the same color of growing. That's because that's the color grass is usually at after it starts growing. So the weeder nor the roller sections have gone a higher stage of growing. And it's not that the weeder or roller progressed to that stage. If I went and did it now, it would be that same color green after using the roller or weeder on grass that has started to grow, as in not just seeded. It will be that color green that it was after using. No matter what, you can do it when it's ready to harvest. It'll go to that lighter green, just growing stage. So using the weeder or the roller will not make it grow faster, with one exception. You can see the whole field is now ready to harvest. It'd be first stage ready to harvest, but the whole field is ready to harvest. But like I said, there is one exception. So I'm going to go through to November to show that. So I did a harvest in November, and then I weeded that side and rolled this side again. See, the middle is just harvested. Now, the reason this is an exception is things don't grow in the winter if you're playing with seasons. This is only an exception if you're playing with seasons. Things don't grow in the winter, so they won't grow in December, January, or February. So when I go to the next month, it will be still harvested in the middle. But the ends are that darker green because the lighter green is not a valid growing state for grass. So it's harvested in the middle and it's half grown on the ends. And it will stay like that all winter. So it's still half grown on the ends, harvested in the center. February, still half grown on the ends, harvested in the center. Now, March can grow crops that have started growing, but it will not grow crops that were either at it won't grow crops that weren't in the growing stage. So it made the ends harvested or harvestable first stage. If it was already harvestable, it would still be first stage. And if it's been harvested, it won't start growing. So now, next month, the ends will be in the second stage, ready to harvest. In the middle will be just half grown. So normally you need to wait 3 months for grass. So if you harvest in April, it's ready in July and ready again in October. This is with seasons. You won't get a harvest during the winter, so it would be ready again next April at second harvest. But another one you can do is May, August, and November. But if you do it in November, this middle part is going to be the first stage ready to harvest in May. So you won't be able to get a full cut unless you use a weeder or a roller right after. Well, as long as you use it between when you cut it and before March. So you can do it anytime during the winter. But between November and February, you would have to use the roller or weeder to be able to do the May, August, and November again. It will all be ready to harvest next month, but the middle part will be first stage ready to harvest. So it's all ready to harvest, but you can tell that this is a different stage. Why you might want to do that though is it might line up better with other things that are going on the April, July, and October. If you see, the May doesn't have as many things you can be planting. Then August August is probably about the same, if not more busy than July. But October, you could still be planting a couple things. And there's a couple more things that can still be harvested. The olives, that's the only month you can harvest. This is base game calendar. So if your May, August, November rotation would line up better with the other field work you're doing, you might want that. So you will want a weeder or roller to continue to do that. But that is the only time that the weeder or roller will actually make it better to use after. It'll make it ready sooner than it would otherwise. Now, the you can harvest grass at any time, as you can see by the calendar. The winter does regress the grass, so if it was at second ready to harvest stage in November, it'll be back to first ready to harvest stage December and stay that way until April. Because March won't progress a ready to harvest crop. It'll still be at first ready to harvest in March. So I'm back in October, and I'm going to fertilize this field. And then I'm going to fertilize it again in November, and then take a first cut with 2 times fertilization in March. So we got 25,341 liters of grass off of that, which is a minus 33.34% change from the same test on second stage. So second stage FERT times 2, which interestingly is the same exact percent change that we got from first harvest to second harvest baseline. And if we reverse that, you can see that the second stage is 50% more than the first stage. That's interesting just because no other yield increase is multiplicative like that. The only other multiplicative increase I can think of anyway is the silage additive. That's multiplicative. You will always get 5% more, which means the more you do, the more it's worth. So if you don't know how a multiplicative increase works, if we have a additive increase, that means that the baseline, the 100% or 1, is added onto the sum of all of the parts. So if we're going with 2 times fertilization, we now have 145%. But with multiplicative, if fertilization was multiplicative, we would have a 1.5 or 150%. It's not really that big of a deal with this because you have the option of having a lesser yield more often, and that makes up for it. In fact, it more than makes up for it if you're on seasons. So if you're not on seasons, you get 6 cuts of grass on first stage, which means you get 600% of 6 times the amount of yield. And if you're not on seasons, you get 4 cuts of second stage. Second stage is worth 50% more. but you had to do 50% more work. You had to cut it 6 times instead of 4. You had to gather it 6 times instead of 4. You had to deal with the either the loose grass or the bales 6 times instead of 4 times, and you had to fertilize it 6 times instead of 4 times for the same yield. So definitely not worth first stage cutting if you're not playing on seasons, unless you just are only doing grass and you just really love it. But even then, I would just speed through it and get to the best time to sell it quicker. But if you're on seasons, you can get 5 cuts of first harvest grass. If you start in March and you end in November, which means you will need the one in November to either roll or weed right after, but you get 5 times as much. You can only get 3 times it on second stage cuts. So even with the 150%, you're only getting 4.5 times, which means you get about 10% more if you do the first stage cutting. But you also did 67% more work because you had to do it 5 times, which means you had to fertilize 5 times. One of them has to be with a weeder or roller in November. You had to cut it. So it's up to you if 10% increase is worth 67% more work. If grass is the only thing you're doing, maybe. If you're doing other things on top of it, probably not. So now for the analysis. Here's the chart with the yield from each test and the change from the baseline. The baseline would be the first cut on a second stage. I did put some or 2 of them I showed the change from second cut. See, there was 2 things that did not affect grass at all, and that would be liming and plowing. Neither of those, neither lime nor plow, affect grass yield at all. The reason I did the seed roller second cut was to show that you still get the increase even after the first cut on if you roll the seeds in. So even though rolling isn't that impactful, if you're going to be keeping a field as grass for a while, it's kind of worth it to roll the seeds in because you will always get that increase. I also have a change from meadowgrass baseline because it's the same size field. And you can see that mulching and seed rolling were the exact same yield as the meadowgrass. In fact, the first cut was a yield decrease. So if we pull up that to show that, now we know mulching and seed rolling have the same effect on the baseline. So they're 2.5% up of a worst case. You can't get worst case grass, and they're all additive increases. So the more you do, the less it's worth, which is why it's not 2.5% increase on those. But we know that mulching meadowgrass affects meadowgrass yield. So that wouldn't be what makes mulching or seed rolling be the same. Why this is important is if you're playing on Erlengrot or a mod map that's set up like Erlengrot where meadowgrass is on fields and you can do everything except plow or roll the seeds in, plowing has no effect, and apparently meadowgrass is treated as if it had the seeds rolled in. So you can save a lot of time and money for no change on the yield by just keeping the meadow grass. Now, if you hate seeing the needs plowing, then that's another thing. But you won't have any detriment to your yield by just keeping the meadow grass and working that. Now, we can't get an actual worst case baseline on grass because it can't grow weeds. So it's always going to have that 20% increase from having no weeds. But we can use math to get a calculation of what the baseline would be. So if fertilization is worth 45%, and it is, the baseline on a second cut grass it should be 21,122. Now, because grass is weird in the fact it does have a multiplicative increase, if you do second stage cutting instead of first stage cutting, I also did the baseline on the first stage cutting of 14,080. You can see how much the increase in the fertilization is. It's not surprising. So the increase over the actual is listed there as well. And even though they're two different baselines, the increase percent is still the same at about 35%. And at the increase the everything test had over the baseline, I only did the everything test on the second stage cut, so 85%. But we know it has baseline 35% increase. We know 20% of that would be from weeds, which means we're missing 15% more. There are two things that also get 15% more: plowing and liming. Neither of those had an effect. One of those obviously counts and the other can't be added. Now, if you know the XML, then you already knew that plow nor lime would have an effect. But plow is listed as a malus according to the game. Lime is a bonus. Neither of them have an effect, which means plow wouldn't give it the malus. So my assumption is that lime is the 15% we're missing. Not really important at all, but I like information, so there is that.